Most people finished the Season 1 finale and saw a clean ending. Dexter walks free. Prater goes in the water. The list goes in his pocket. A few photographers standing outside a Brooklyn restaurant last summer saw something that should not have been possible at all. Tonight, we go slowly through every Season 2 theory worth sitting with. Section 1. The 5 names Dexter walked out with. Leon Prater spent a fortune building a private museum of murder, and the strangest part of that collection was never the weapons on the walls. It was the paperwork. Somewhere behind the display cases and the climate-controlled glass, the billionaire kept files, real ones, on killers who had never been caught, never been charged, and in some cases, never even been named by police. When Dexter Morgan got locked inside that vault to die, he found himself trapped in a room that was also the single largest unsolved crime archive in the state of New York. And when he finally walked out of it, he did not leave empty-handed. 5 files came out with him. One belonged to Al, the cheerful family man from Wisconsin who strangled women in parks and kept their ponytails as souvenirs, known inside Prater's circle as Rapunzel. The other 4 belonged to people the audience has never met: the Midnight Mangler, Jaw Splitter, the Sleepy-Eyed Stranger, the Yonkers Slayer. 4 names, 4 blank spaces, sitting under Al's file in Dexter's hands, while the yacht pushed out into the harbor. The camera lingered on them long enough that nobody watching could mistake what they were looking at. And that is exactly why those 4 names became the foundation of almost every theory that followed. To understand why that stack matters so much, it helps to remember how Dexter got near it in the first place. Prater ran something closer to a collector's club than a criminal organization. He gathered active serial killers, brought them together in private, fed them, flattered them, and listened to them talk about their work the way an art dealer listens to painters. Dexter got inside that circle by killing a man named Ronald Schmidt, the killer the city had been calling the Dark Passenger for murdering rideshare drivers, and then wearing Schmidt's reputation like a borrowed coat. Inside the group, everyone knew him as Red. Nobody knew him as Dexter Morgan, and nobody knew him as the Bay Harbor Butcher. From that position, he worked through the guest list one by one. Lowell Sloan, the tattoo collector, went first. Gareth Pike's twin brother went next. Then Gareth himself, the pair of them operating together as the Gemini Killer. Mia Lapierre, who called herself Lady Vengeance, ended up arrested and then dead in a jail cell. By the time the finale arrived, the only member of Prater's collection still breathing and still free was Al, who had turned down Dexter's invitation to meet, thrown his burner phone out a car window, and driven home to his wife and his 4 children, with a 5th one on the way. That is the part of the story that makes the file stack so heavy. Dexter did not take those 5 files as souvenirs. He took them as a schedule. The final moments of the season showed him accepting something he had spent 4 separate shows trying to argue his way out of, which is that this is simply what he does, and the files under his hand were the practical version of that acceptance. Prater's fortune bought a collection. Dexter's escape turned that collection into a to-do list. The first real crack in the mystery came in the summer of 2026, and it came from a casting announcement rather than a trailer. Paramount confirmed that Gabriel Luna, known to most viewers from The Last of Us, had joined Season 2 as a guest star, playing a character named Ray Ballard, a serial killer operating under the name the Sleepy-Eyed Stranger. One of the 4 blank spaces on that list suddenly had a face and a full name attached to it. Luna had actually been spotted on the New York set weeks before the announcement, filming a sequence where his character left a residential building and caught a cab, with Michael C. Hall and Uma Thurman coming out of the building next door and heading for separate cars moments later. That single casting decision changed the shape of every theory around the file stack. Before Luna, it was reasonable to think the 4 unnamed killers were set dressing, a way to signal that Dexter had work ahead without committing the writers to anything specific. After Luna, the list looked like a blueprint. Showrunner Clyde Phillips had already described his plan for the season as a return to the structure that made the original show work, with one central antagonist carrying the year and smaller targets moving through individual episodes. 4 names in a folder is exactly the right amount of raw material for that kind of season, and the theory that took hold across the fan community is that each remaining file gets its own stretch of screen time. The theory goes further than simple episode math for a lot of viewers. A popular version holds that the files themselves are the danger, not the people inside them. Prater assembled that archive for his own pleasure, and he was not a careful man about paperwork by the end. Detective Claudette Wallace and her partner Melvin Oliva walked into that vault after the gala and found Batista's body, Prater's fingerprints on the gun, and a room full of documents about uncaught killers. Anything Dexter removed from that room is now a gap in an inventory that homicide detectives are actively working through. If Wallace ever builds a list of what should be in that vault and compares it to what is actually there, 5 missing files become 5 arrows pointing at whoever walked out of the building that night. A darker version of the same theory suggests Prater knew exactly what he was doing when he left those files where a trapped man could find them. He had already worked out that Red was really Dexter Morgan by that point, thanks to information he pulled out of Batista. He had already decided he wanted to kill both Dexter and Harrison himself. Under that reading, the vault was never only a tomb, it was a final gift, curated by a man who understood that handing a compulsive killer a list of targets is a way of steering him long after the giver is dead. Dexter spent the whole season being studied by a collector, and the theory argues that the collector got the last move after all. A quieter idea is also circulating, one that fits the way this franchise usually operates. The 4 unnamed killers might not all be killers by the time Dexter reaches them. Prater's files were built on rumor, private investigators, and money, not on evidence that would survive a courtroom. At least one of those 4 names could belong to someone who is innocent, or someone who was active decades ago and stopped, or someone already dead and buried under a different name. Dexter has always relied on Harry's code to keep himself pointed at people who deserve what he does to them, and the code depends entirely on the quality of his information. A list handed to him by a man who idolized murderers is the weakest foundation he has ever worked from. The set photography from the summer of 2026 added fuel to all of this. Photographers caught Michael C. Hall dragging the wrestler Chris Jericho into an alley after apparently injecting him with something, which is about as clear a signal as production can give that the season includes individual targets outside the main storyline. Another image showed Hall alongside Shavo Odagian, the System of a Down bassist, credited under the name RH. Neither of those appearances suggests a season-long villain. They suggest exactly the structure Phillips described, with smaller work filling out the space around the big story. The room itself carried a second problem that most theories treat as the real-time bomb of the season. Prater's collection was not limited to paper. Sitting among his acquisitions were objects pulled directly out of Dexter's own history, gathered by a man with unlimited money and no interest in explaining where anything came from. The exsanguination table Brian Moser used as the ice truck killer was in there, the same table Dexter used on Brian at the end of that story. The hammer Arthur Mitchell swung as the Trinity killer was in there, again the same weapon that ended Arthur's life. Most importantly, Prater had somehow acquired Dexter's original box of blood slides and one of his knives, the ones James Dokes took as evidence during the Bay Harbor butcher investigation in Miami all those years ago. That last detail is the one that keeps coming up in theory threads, and for good reason. Those slides are not a curiosity. They are the physical evidence from a closed case that was officially pinned on a dead police sergeant, and they are now sitting inside a crime scene being processed by a homicide detective who has spent the entire series noticing things nobody else notices. Wallace already knows Batista came to New York chasing a theory about the butcher. She already found Batista's body in the same room as the slides. The theory that the Miami case reopens in Season 2 does not require any leap of imagination at all. It only requires one detective to run one set of evidence tags and ask why a billionaire in Manhattan owned property from a Florida investigation. That leaves the one name on the list the audience already knows well. Al Walker looked like the least threatening person in Prater's circle, a big friendly man who talked about his kids and his marriage the way anyone might at a work dinner, and who described strangling a woman jogging through a park with the same easy warmth. He kept ponytails. Prater displayed them. Dexter looked directly at that display while trapped in the vault, which the writers used as a reminder that the friendly one is still out there living a comfortable life in Wisconsin with a family that has no idea what he is. Eric Stonestreet, who plays him, has been careful about what he says and still managed to say quite a lot. Asked whether Al comes back, he pointed out that almost nobody gets away from Dexter, and that when he asked producers on set how many people had managed it, the answer was not many. He also addressed the biggest question hanging over the character directly. A large portion of the audience believes Al refused that final meeting because he had worked out that Red was not who he claimed to be and threw the burner phone away to cut the connection before it could kill him. Stone Street does not believe that is what happened. His reading is that Al simply wanted to get home to his wife, and that Dexter was good enough at his cover that nothing gave him away. Both readings produce completely different seasons. If Al drove away oblivious, then he is a man living a normal suburban life who has no idea a stranger is coming, and Dexter has the easier version of the job ahead of him. If Al drove away suspicious, then the friendliest killer in the club has spent the entire gap between seasons knowing that someone inside Prater's circle was hunting the circle itself, watching the news for word about the gala, and preparing for a visit. The second version turns a simple cleanup job into the most dangerous item on the list, because a target who is expecting Dexter has always been the only kind of target that has ever really threatened him. Geography is the other open question around Al. Dexter's entire operation depends on knowing a city, its garbage schedules, its water, its empty buildings, and its blind spots. Wisconsin gives him none of that. The theory that Al gets handled in New York usually argues that something has to draw him back to the city, most likely the collapse of Prater's operation or the police attention that followed it. The competing theory has Dexter making the trip himself, which would put him hundreds of miles from his own son, his own routine, and everything the finale established as the reason he can function at all. Neither option is comfortable, and that is usually a sign the writers are heading toward one of them. There is one more piece of unfinished business that rarely makes these lists, and probably should. In the 8th episode, Dexter had a mobster named Vinny Valente lined up, played by Steve Schirripa, and Batista walked in and interrupted the whole arrangement before it could be finished. The season then handed itself over to Prater, the Vault, and everything that followed, and it never came back to that thread on screen. Whatever happened to Valente, the sequence established that Dexter had targets in this city before the files ever came into his hands, chosen the old way rather than handed to him. A man with a folder of 5 names and a habit of picking his own is a man with considerably more work in front of him than 10 episodes can hold. What the file stack really left behind is a version of Dexter that has never existed before in this franchise. In Miami, he found his targets through his job, sifting through case files at Miami Metro and choosing quietly from the cracks in the system. In Iron Lake, he barely hunted at all until circumstance forced his hand. Now he has a folder, prepared by someone else, containing more work than he could reasonably finish in a year, and he has already told the audience directly that this is who he intends to be. The season opens with him holding a map to his own future, drawn by a dead man who wanted to own him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Dexter took 5 files out of that vault. The theories get much stranger around the one file he deliberately left behind, sitting open where the police would be certain to find it. That name belonged to a killer who stopped hunting decades ago, and the man cast to play him is nearly 80 years old. Section 2. The man in the wheelchair who never stopped calling. There was a long metal rod mounted on the wall of Prater's collection, fitted at one end with a curved hook, and the placard underneath it named the man it belonged to. The tool was a manhole cover hook, the kind city workers used to lift heavy iron plates out of the street, and somebody had used it to kill at least 24 people in New York City. The killer was never caught. The killings simply stopped one day, the way a faucet stops, and the case went cold and stayed cold for decades, while the man responsible went on living somewhere in the 5 boroughs. Season 1 never showed his face. It did something more unsettling instead. It established that the New York Ripper never actually stopped working. He only changed what the work looked like. Rather than hunting, he started calling. He would telephone the families of the people he had killed years earlier, and he would talk to them. He would use details only the killer could know. He would describe what he had done to their sister, their daughter, their mother, in plain language, and then he would hang up and leave them holding the receiver. One of those recorded calls made it into the show, played to an audience, and it turned an unseen character into the most disturbing presence of the entire season, without a single frame of him on screen. Detective Claudette Wallace was the one who caught that case originally, and she never let go of it. The show established her as the kind of investigator who solves things by noticing patterns other people walk past, and it also established that the Ripper is the one pattern she has never been able to close. In the 7th episode, she gave a presentation at Collins University, laying out her profile of the man, working through what she believed he was, and why she believed he had gone quiet. Both Dexter and Harrison sat in that audience listening to her, which the writers used to put all three of these characters in the same room, around the same unsolved case. Her conclusion was that the phone calls were not a taunt aimed at the police. They were a way for an old man to feel the way he used to feel, borrowing back the sense of power and control he could no longer take by force. Then the finale arrived and gave the case a name. Buried in the paperwork inside Prater's vault was a dossier on the Ripper, and inside that dossier was the name Don Frampt. Dexter left it deliberately, sitting where the police could not miss it, and Melvin Oliva was the one who pushed it in front of Wallace. After years of nothing, the detective walked out of that building, holding the identity she had chased her entire career, handed to her by a serial killer she does not know she has met. What happened next belongs to the audience rather than the show. The name Don Frampt landed in a fan community with 2 decades of habits and immediately turned into something enormous. Theories ran in every direction at once. Some argued Frampt was an alias hiding a familiar face, since nothing about the file confirmed the name was real. Others tried to connect it to Cody, the stepson Dexter left behind in Miami after Rita's murder. A whole branch of the theory tree tried to make it Jonah Mitchell, the son of the Trinity Killer, which would have given the franchise the generational echo it has flirted with since the beginning. Clyde Phillips later acknowledged how far that speculation ran, describing the reaction as the internet going a little crazy, and admitted that the volume of it pushed the writers to think harder about a character they had originally planned to leave as background texture. His confirmation was short and complete. Frampt would be in the 2nd season. The casting announcement came on the 2nd of April in 2026, and it did something almost nobody expected. Paramount confirmed that Brian Cox had joined the show as Don Frampt, and released an official description of the character alongside the news. The description matched Wallace's profile almost line for line. A serial killer who terrorized the city years ago, no longer active, who has found a new way to live inside his own infamy by continuing to taunt the survivors of a murder spree that ended long ago. The choice of actor answered a question nobody had thought to ask. Cox is in his late 70s, which makes Frampt the oldest antagonist Dexter Morgan has ever faced across 4 separate shows. Then, the set photographs arrived and made it stranger still. Photographers caught Cox in character, wearing a white wig, and in some of those images, the Ripper is in a wheelchair. The most feared uncaught killer in the history of the city, the man whose weapon sat mounted on a billionaire's wall like a museum piece, is an elderly man who cannot walk unassisted. That single image generated more theory traffic than any other piece of Season 2 news, and the theories split cleanly into 2 camps. The first camp argues that the wheelchair is exactly what it appears to be, and that the entire point of the character is the mismatch between the legend and the man. Under this reading, the season is about what happens to a monster when time takes the ability to be a monster away from him. The phone calls become the only violence left available to him, and Dexter finds himself standing over a target who is already being punished by biology in a way no kill table could improve on. It would be the hardest test the code has ever faced, because the code exists to justify killing people who are still dangerous. The second camp treats the frailty as the trap. Appearances have never protected anyone in this franchise, and a man who murdered 24 people with a length of iron and was never so much as questioned is not a man who lost his instincts. Several theories point out that Frampt has had decades to prepare for the possibility of being found, and that anyone who kept calling survivors that entire time was actively courting discovery. A killer who wants attention and has waited 40 years for it is a killer who has thought about how the ending goes. The wheelchair, in this version, is the single most effective disguise available to him. Another theory is built entirely on the timing of the casting announcement, and it is one of the sharper ideas going around. Season 1 built the Ripper as a mystery and rode that mystery for 10 episodes without ever showing him. The natural move would have been to protect that reveal, keep the casting quiet, and let the face land as a shock inside the season. Instead, production named the actor before a single frame had been shot, effectively removing the suspense on purpose. Some fans read that as confidence, a signal that the season has bigger surprises waiting and does not need this one. Others read it as misdirection and argue that Frampt may not be the real antagonist at all, or may not be the real Ripper. Naming a decoy loudly is a reasonable way to protect something else. The most developed version of that idea suggests the Ripper story is really about succession. It notes that this franchise has always been interested in what gets passed down, from Harry's code to Brian's blood to Harrison's inheritance, and argues that a killer at the end of his life, with no ability to hunt, would naturally look for someone to do the hunting for him. A younger relative carrying the hook, a student, someone who learned the phone calls first and worked backward. Under that reading, catching Frampt does not close the case, it opens the real one, and Wallace's decades of work end up leading her to the wrong man at exactly the moment she believes she has won. Set photography gave that theory a piece of support that nobody predicted. Kristen Ritter was spotted on location interacting with Cox's stunt double, dressed in the same white wig and the same clothing as the actor, which suggests a scene between the Ripper and Mia Lapierre. Wallace was also caught filming a scene face-to-face with Frampt, meaning the detective and the killer she has chased her whole career meet on screen this season. Those two pieces of information together describe a character who is not sitting quietly in a care facility waiting to be discovered. They describe someone who is talking to people, including people in Dexter's orbit. The weapon deserves more attention than it usually gets in these conversations, because it is the one piece of hard information about Frampt that came from the show rather than from a press release. A manhole cover hook is not a weapon anyone chooses by accident. It is heavy, awkward, impossible to conceal under normal clothing, and completely unremarkable in the hands of anyone wearing work clothes near an open street plate. A man carrying one through Manhattan at night in the middle of the last century would have been invisible. Several theories build outward from exactly that, arguing Frampt either worked for the city or dressed as though he did, and that the reason he was never caught is that every witness who saw him saw a maintenance worker and forgot him within the hour. The same logic feeds the theory about how he moved his victims. New York sits on top of an enormous network of tunnels, service corridors, and drainage systems, all of which are reachable through the exact plates that Tool was designed to lift. A killer with keys to the underside of the city has a disposal method that nothing above ground can match, and it would explain why a case with 24 victims left investigators so little to work with. That idea also gives the season a natural setting for its climax, since the franchise has always liked to end its biggest confrontations in places that belong to the killer rather than to Dexter. The question the show has not answered, and the one that generates the most competing theories, is why the killings stopped. Wallace has her own explanation, built around age and diminishing physical ability, and the wheelchair in the set photographs supports it. Other theories go further. One argues that Frampt was arrested and imprisoned for something unrelated, served a long sentence under his real name, and came out too old to resume, which would explain both the clean break and the decades of silence. Another suggests a victim fought back badly enough to leave him permanently damaged, and that the phone calls are the behavior of a man who blames the people he hunted for taking his ability to hunt. A third, and the bleakest of them, holds that nothing happened at all. He simply got old, the way everyone does, and the horror is that a monster can retire the same way an accountant does. One question almost nobody was asking, until the finale forced it, involves the paperwork itself. Prater had a file on him. The police had spent decades unable to name the New York Ripper, and a venture capitalist with a hobby had the man's identity sitting in a folder in his basement. That means somebody found Frampt, and it was not law enforcement. Prater bought his collection the way he bought everything else, through money, private investigators, and people willing to work outside the rules on his behalf, which points directly at the woman who handled exactly that kind of work for him. Charlie ran security and logistics for Prater's entire operation, and the show established that she was the one who cleaned up his problems and sourced the things he wanted. The theory that she is the one who located the Ripper has real weight behind it, and it changes the balance of the season considerably. If Charlie found Frampt once, she can find him again. She knows things about him the file may not contain, and she becomes far more valuable to Dexter than a former enemy has any right to be. It also means the Ripper may already know he was found, because being investigated by professionals is difficult to miss, and a man that careful would have noticed someone asking questions about a case that had been dead for 40 years. What all of this leaves behind is a villain constructed as the exact opposite of the one this franchise is still measured against. Arthur Mitchell worked as a threat because he was active, physically capable, and hiding inside an ordinary family, which meant every scene carried the possibility of immediate violence. Frampt is built the other way. He is finished, exposed, immobile, and apparently at peace with all three. And the horror he generates comes from how much he still enjoys what he did decades after he stopped doing it. Dexter has killed men who were mid-spree, men who were about to kill again, men who left him no choice. He has never sat across from someone whose only remaining crime is memory, and the season appears designed to make him decide what the code actually says about that. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A retired killer in a wheelchair is a strange enough problem for one season. The theory that overtook it entirely came from a photograph taken outside a Brooklyn restaurant in broad daylight, showing Dexter having lunch with a woman the show already put in a body bag. She leaned in, whispered something in his ear, and walked away. Section 3. The woman who died in a jail cell and came back for lunch. On the last day of June, in 2026, a photographer working the streets of Brooklyn found Michael C. Hall filming an outdoor scene at a restaurant, dressed in the kind of low-key clothing Dexter Morgan wears when he does not want to be looked at. That alone was routine. Season 2 had been shooting all over New York for months, and set photography had become a weekly event. What stopped the fan community cold was the person sitting at the table with him, Kristen Ritter, in character, in a short red dress with black patterns and a denim jacket, alive and in daylight, playing a woman the first season put in the ground. Mia LaPierre was one of the shortest arcs in the whole season, and one of the most memorable. She appeared in 3 episodes as a special guest star, part of Prater's collection of active killers, working under the name Lady Vengeance. Dexter spent real time with her, an entire day of it, in a stretch of the season that came closest to romance in the middle of everything else. Then he did something to her that he has rarely done to anyone. When the police started closing in on Harrison for the murder of Ryan Foster, Dexter took the watch Ryan had been wearing and planted it inside Mia's collection of trophies, framing her for a killing she had nothing to do with in order to pull the investigation away from his son. It worked. She was arrested. Wallace, being Wallace, immediately sensed that the evidence sat wrong, that something about the case did not fit the woman in front of her, and before the detective could resolve that instinct, Mia was killed in jail. The show delivered that death quickly, in the 6th episode, and for most of the audience it read as final. A character introduced late, used hard, and closed out. Then the confirmations started arriving. Late in June of 2026, it was reported that Ritter would return as a guest star in the new season. Executive producer Scott Reynolds posted a photograph of himself with Ritter on the Season 2 set, and followed it with an image of 2 production chairs sitting side by side, one labeled with her character's name, and one labeled with Dexter's. Within a day, the theory machine was running at full speed, and it split into 2 camps that have been arguing ever since. The first camp made a strong case that Mia would be back as a hallucination. That reading has enormous precedent behind it. This franchise has always used imaginary company as its primary way of showing what Dexter is thinking. Harry has narrated his conscience since the pilot. Deborah took over that role after her death. Season 1 of Resurrection expanded the practice enormously, bringing back Arthur Mitchell, Miguel Prado, James Dokes, and finally Brian Moser inside the vault, each one speaking to a different part of Dexter's self-justification. Bringing back a dead woman he had complicated feelings about would fit that pattern perfectly, and it would let the show use Ritter without undoing a death. The strongest evidence for that camp came from wardrobe. Photographers caught Ritter filming on the 30th of June, again on the 1st of July, and again on the 8th, and she was wearing the same outfit every single time. Harry Morgan wears the same clothes in every appearance across the entire franchise, because a figure inside someone's head does not change shirts. Behind-the-scenes photography suggested James Remar was doing exactly that again in Season 2. When a fan account posted more than a dozen new images of Hall and Ritter together, the comment section filled within hours, and the most popular replies all argued the same thing, that Lady Vengeance was a ghost. The second camp pointed at everything else in the frame. The scenes were shot in bright daylight, in public, at a restaurant table, in Queens, and later at Hudson River Park. Mia holds a phone. She approaches the table. At one point she leans in, says something into Dexter's ear, and walks away. None of that resembles how the show films an internal voice, which usually happens in private, in enclosed spaces, with nobody else able to react. And then there was the detail that broke the argument open for a lot of viewers. James Remar was spotted at the same filming location, which would mean two separate figments of the same man's imagination occupying the same scene at the same time. Harry appears as a guide during moments that matter. Stacking a second hallucination on top of him would be a first for the franchise and would muddy the one storytelling device it has always kept clean. The character argument is the sharpest point the second camp has. Every person Dexter hallucinates left a deep and lasting mark on his life. His adoptive father raised and shaped him. His biological brother shares his origin. Deborah was the only person he ever loved without reservation. Trinity, Prado, and Dokes each represent a specific failure he has never resolved. Mia shared 3 episodes with him and a single day of real connection. She simply does not carry enough weight to earn a permanent seat inside his head, and the show has been careful about who gets that seat for 20 years. Which brings the conversation to the theory that has now overtaken all the others. Mia Lapierre faked her death. That idea started circulating almost immediately after her jail cell scene aired, and never fully went away, kept alive in part by Ritter herself, who dropped more than one hint over the following year that the audience had not seen the last of the character. A woman who was inside Prater's circle had access to Prater's resources, and Prater's resources included a security chief who solved impossible logistical problems for a living. Getting a prisoner declared dead and quietly moved is exactly the kind of thing that money and a professional fixer can accomplish, and it is considerably less far-fetched than several things this franchise has already done. If she is alive, the next question is what she wants, and the set photography answers part of it. The images from Queens and from Hudson River Park do not show two people meeting by accident or arguing. They show two people working. In several frames, they appear to be watching something together, moving with purpose, operating as a unit. Set that beside the photographs placing her with the stand-in for the Ripper, and the most supported version of the theory is that Dexter and Lady Vengeance spend part of this season hunting the New York Ripper as a team. The franchise has run this exact play twice before, and both times it ended badly. Miguel Prado became Dexter's confidant in the 3rd season, learned what he was, tried to become a version of it himself, and finished on the table. Lumen Pierce became his partner in the 5th season, killed alongside him, and left because she healed, and he did not. A partner in this show is never a permanent arrangement. It is a way of testing whether Dexter can be known by another person and survive it, and the answer has been no every single time. One version of the alliance theory carries real danger, and it hinges on a single question the set photographs cannot answer. Mia knew Dexter as Red, the man who had taken the Dark Passenger's reputation, not as the Bay Harbor Butcher, and not as Dexter Morgan. If she has spent the gap between seasons working out who he actually is, then she also has the ability to work out who put Ryan Foster's watch in her trophy collection and sent her to a cell. The character's entire identity was built around punishing men who hurt women and taking her own revenge on people who thought they were untouchable. She chose the name Lady Vengeance for herself. Handing that woman a genuine reason to hate Dexter Morgan is the most dangerous thing this season could do, and the writers know it. That possibility reframes every photograph from the summer. An alliance between two killers hunting a third is a good story. An alliance where one participant is quietly building a case against the other, smiling across a restaurant table while she does it, is the story this show has always preferred. The whispered line in Dexter's ear becomes something else entirely under that reading, and so does the apparent warmth between them, because the most effective way to get close enough to destroy Dexter Morgan has always been to let him believe he is not alone. One piece of context gets skipped over in most of these theories, and it may be the most important part of the whole thread. What Dexter did to Mia was new for him. He has framed people before, most famously when he let an entire police department believe James Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher, and he has always found ways to redirect suspicion onto the guilty. But planting Ryan Foster's watch in her trophies was different in one specific way. He did it to protect Harrison. He took a woman he had spent a day with, a woman he had feelings for, and used her as a shield for his son without hesitating. That decision sat inside a season built around the idea that Dexter was becoming a better father, and the show never made him answer for it. He did not lose sleep over it. He did not revisit it. When she died in that cell, the story moved on within minutes, because the story had already gotten what it needed from her. If the writers are bringing her back, the most likely reason is that they never intended that debt to stay unpaid, and the second season is where the bill arrives. Mia is not a loose thread in the plot. She is a loose thread in Dexter's character, which is a far more dangerous kind for this show to leave hanging. The gap between the two seasons matters here as well, because the new season jumps forward by a number of years, rather than picking up the following week. That jump does a lot of quiet work. It gives Mia enough time to disappear, recover, build a new identity, and find her way back to New York with a plan already formed. It also gives her enough time to research the man she met at Prater's party, work through what actually happened to her, and arrive at a conclusion. The same jump explains how two people who last saw each other under those circumstances could sit down at a restaurant looking almost comfortable. Nothing in those photographs suggests a first meeting or a confrontation. They suggest people who have already had the difficult conversation off-screen and have moved into whatever comes after it, which means the season is likely to open with that relationship already established, and the audience will spend several episodes trying to work out what agreement the two of them reached during a period nobody got to watch. The way her return was handled tells its own small story. Ritter was billed as a special guest star for her 3 episodes in the first season, the kind of credit that usually signals a self-contained appearance rather than an ongoing role. The news that she was coming back broke in the last days of June, and photographs of her filming with Michael C. Hall surfaced within roughly a day of that announcement. That has become a pattern with this production. Information arrives, and then the streets of New York confirm or complicate it almost immediately, because a show cannot film in Brooklyn in daylight and keep secrets at the same time. What her return really leaves behind is a structural problem for the season that has nothing to do with romance or revenge. Dexter spent the finale accepting that he needs people, and the show framed that acceptance as growth. Mia is the test of it. She is the only person in his New York life who knows what he does, chose to do the same thing herself, and has a reason to resent him. If he can hold that relationship without it collapsing, the finale's conclusion holds. If he cannot, then the lesson he learned on that yacht was another story he told himself, and this franchise has never been shy about proving that Dexter's lessons do not stick. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Mia is not the only woman from Prater's operation who came back to New York. The first official images from the new season show Dexter sitting across a restaurant table from someone who spent all of last year trying to end him, and in one of those photographs, the two of them appear to be holding hands. Section 4. The bodyguard who came back to New York. Paramount released the first official images from the new season at the end of July in 2026, and one photograph pulled more attention than everything else in the batch combined. Michael C. Hall and Uma Thurman sitting across a restaurant table from each other in what looks unmistakably like a date. Warm light, close framing. In the version most outlets ran, the two of them appear to be holding hands across the table, locked in the kind of stare the show usually saves for a confession. The caption confirmed it was taken from the second episode. That image is remarkable because of how the first season left these two people. Charlotte Brown, known to everyone as Charlie, was Leon Prater's head of security, a former special operations officer who handled the parts of his life that money alone could not fix. She spent the season working out who Dexter really was, sweeping his story for holes, following him, testing him, and holding a very real threat over him the entire time. She was not the comic relief muscle. She was the most competent adversary in the show, and unlike Prater, she never mistook Dexter for something to be admired. What made her more than a bodyguard was the reason she stayed. Her mother is seriously ill, the treatment is expensive, and Prater was paying for it. That single arrangement explains everything Charlie did across 10 episodes. She was not loyal to him. She was employed by him in the most complete sense of the word, trapped by a bill she could not carry alone, doing terrible things for a man she clearly found repulsive because the alternative was watching her mother go without care. The finale broke that arrangement in a way that has left the character in an almost impossible position. While Dexter was locked in the vault, he found Prater's file on Charlie, complete with photographs, the kind of material that exists specifically so that an employer never has to worry about an employee walking away. He told her about it. He offered to destroy it in exchange for safe passage out of the building for himself and for Harrison. She turned him down. Instead, she went to Prater directly, quit on the spot, and told him plainly that he would keep paying for her mother's treatment or she would burn his entire operation down in public. Then she got her mother out of the house and drove her home to Amherst, and the last thing the season showed of her was that departure, set to light jazz, while Dexter monologued on a stolen yacht. Every theory about her Season 2 return starts from the same arithmetic. Prater is dead. The man who was paying for her mother's care went into New York Harbor in pieces, and dead billionaires do not honor blackmail agreements. Whatever leverage she walked out with became worthless the moment Dexter put a knife in Prater's chest, and she has no way of knowing that is what happened. Her mother's treatment stopped being funded on the same night, and the only reason she left the city in the first place has evaporated. The file is the other problem. Nobody destroyed it on screen. Dexter offered to, and she declined, which means the paperwork was still sitting in that vault when the police arrived, or still sitting in Dexter's hands if he decided to take it along with the other 5. The show has never confirmed which, and the theory community has run hard in both directions. If the police have it, Charlie is now a person of interest in an investigation into a billionaire's murder. If Dexter has it, he is holding the single most effective piece of leverage in the entire series over the one person alive who knows exactly what he is, and their restaurant date takes on a very different flavor. The most straightforward theory, and probably the most likely, is that the relationship is transactional at the start. Charlie needs money and needs the file gone. Dexter needs someone who can find people, move quietly, and handle the parts of his work that require professional skills he does not have. She was the person who located targets, cleaned up scenes, and made problems disappear for a man with unlimited resources, and every one of those abilities is directly useful to a man working through a list of uncaught killers. The alliance writes itself, and it explains why the pair of them keep turning up in set photographs together throughout the season. But the first look photograph does not look transactional, and that is what has the fan community so divided. The season's official framing does not help matters either, since it lists a personal crisis alongside the killers as one of the things Dexter is up against this year. Whatever else that turns out to mean, it points at a man in his 50s who has just decided, out loud, that he needs other people, and who has no functional experience of what that looks like with an adult who knows the truth about him. That points directly at the most cited comparison in every version of this theory, Hannah McKay. The 7th and 8th seasons of the original series built their emotional spine around a woman who knew exactly what Dexter was, had done comparable things herself, and did not flinch at any of it. She was the only romantic relationship in the entire run that did not require him to perform normality, and it ended with her taking Harrison to Argentina while Dexter drove into a storm. Charlie occupies almost the same position now, with one significant upgrade. She is not a poisoner working in a greenhouse. She is a trained operator who has spent a career doing violence competently, and she has already proven she can go up against Dexter without losing. The competing theory takes the same photograph and reads it as a performance. Charlie interrogated people for a living. She spent an entire season pretending to accept explanations she did not believe while quietly gathering information, and she was better at it than anyone else in the show. A woman with that skill set, sitting across a table holding hands with the man responsible for the collapse of her employment, her income, and her mother's medical care, is not necessarily a woman in love. Under this reading, she is running the same play she ran all last season, and the difference is that Dexter now has an emotional stake in believing her. A third theory splits the difference and has quietly become the favorite among longtime viewers. Charlie does not become his partner or his enemy. She becomes his supplier. Prater's role in the first season was to provide access, information, and targets, and his death left that function empty. Charlie is the one person who can fill it, because she built the network Prater used. In that version, the season is about Dexter accidentally rebuilding the exact structure he destroyed, with a more capable person at the center of it, and never noticing that he has swapped one handler for another. Her mother sits at the middle of all of this, and most theories agree that the character is there for a reason beyond sympathy. The illness is Charlie's leash. As long as her mother needs care, Charlie can be bought, pressured, or held in place by whoever controls the money. Two versions of what happens next dominate the conversation. In the first, Dexter starts paying, quietly, which would give him something he has never had, a person indebted to him, rather than the reverse. In the second, the mother dies during the season, and Charlie loses the only thing that has ever restrained her, A woman with her training and no remaining reason to compromise is the most dangerous single person Dexter has met since Iron Lake. Amherst matters too, in a small way that theory threads have picked at. She did not take her mother to a facility or a city. She took her home, to the house the family used to live in, the sort of choice a person makes when they are done and want to stop moving. Coming back to New York after that reverses a decision that looked final, and it takes something substantial to reverse a decision like that. Either the money ran out, or somebody came looking for her, or she found a reason in that file to believe the story was not finished. The one thing every version of the theory agrees on is that Charlie is the largest security risk in Dexter's life, and he seems to have decided to keep her close anyway. Batista is dead. Prater is dead. Every member of the Killers Club except Al is dead. Charlie is the last living adult outside Dexter's own family who understands that the man calling himself by a borrowed name in a rented apartment in New York City is the Bay Harbor Butcher. In this franchise, that specific piece of knowledge has always ended one of two ways, and the people who have held it have not tended to survive the season in which they acquired it. One theory, connecting Charlie to the rest of the season, has quietly become the most persuasive idea in the whole conversation, and it requires nothing more than putting two returning characters in the same sentence. Mia LaPierre died in a jail cell. If she is walking around Brooklyn, somebody arranged that, and arranging something like that requires money, contacts inside a correctional system, and a professional willing to organize it. There was exactly one person in Prater's world who did that kind of work. Charlie located people, moved people, and made inconvenient situations disappear on behalf of a man who never asked how. That would make Charlie the reason the season's biggest surprise is possible, and it would explain why she has come back to a city that has nothing left in it for her. It would also give her a hold over Mia, worth more than money, in a season where everyone is hunting everyone. Nothing in the released material confirms any of it. But two women, from the same dead man's operation, returning at the same time, one of them supposedly buried, is the sort of arithmetic this fandom does very well. The file itself remains the most tantalizing blank space. The show never revealed what Prater had on her, only that it was serious enough to keep a highly capable woman working for a man she despised, and that it included photographs. Theories about the contents have ranged from something out of her military service to something involving the work she did for Prater directly, and the most sensible reading is that it documents her participation in his operation, which would make her an accessory to a great deal of what happened in that mansion. The show has been careful about her past in general. Her full name came out in the credits rather than the dialogue, and almost nothing about her life before Prater made it to the screen, unusual for a character with that much presence. That blankness is part of why so many viewers find her the most unpredictable figure in the new season. Every other character has a documented history the audience can reason from. Dexter has 20 years of it. Harrison has a childhood the show has depicted twice. Wallace has an old case. Quinn has an old grudge. And Frampt has a body count. Charlie has a sick mother, a skill set, and a fortune's worth of loyalty that has just evaporated, and that combination could point in any direction the writers choose. A moral distinction about her is worth noting, because it separates her from everyone else in Dexter's orbit. She is the only significant figure in this story who has done terrible things for a reason that is completely comprehensible. She was not compelled, not thrilled, and not curious. She needed the money for someone she loves. In a show populated by people who kill because they enjoy it, or because they cannot stop, a woman who did it as employment is the closest thing to an ordinary person in the room, and that makes her the most effective mirror the season could hold up to Dexter's insistence that he is not like the others. What Charlie leaves behind is the cleanest test the show has set for its own premise. Resurrection ended by arguing that Dexter is at his most functional when other people are in his life, that isolation nearly killed him twice, and that the version of him with a son and a friend and a neighborhood is the version that lasts. Charlie is where that argument either holds or falls apart, because she is not a friend who does not know, and she is not family. She is a person with full information, real leverage, and every reason to use it, sitting across a table from him with her hand in his. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The season's most dangerous relationship might not involve Charlie at all. In the same batch of first look photographs, Harrison Morgan appears in a police uniform, standing in a precinct with a badge on his chest, and the woman beside him is training in the homicide unit that is hunting his father. Section 5. The badge on Harrison Morgan's chest. The single most consequential image in the entire First Look release did not involve a killer. It showed Jack Alcott standing in a precinct in a police uniform, badge on his chest, looking like he belongs there. When the first season ended, Harrison Morgan had only just enrolled at the police academy, a decision made in the last stretch of the story as he tried to build something out of everything he had been through. The new photographs show him past that entirely. He is on the job. That change confirms something the production had been hinting at for months. There is a significant jump in time between the two seasons. The first season was set relatively soon after the events in Iron Lake, close to the middle of this decade, and everything about the new material points forward, bringing the story much closer to the present day. An academy recruit does not become a sworn officer in a matter of weeks, which means the audience has missed a real stretch of these characters' lives, including whatever conversations the Morgan family had about what happened at Prater's gala. A badge on Harrison changes the shape of the whole franchise, and the reason why sits in how he got here. He arrived in New York carrying the belief that he had killed his own father. He was working at a hotel, living small, using drugs, and coming apart quietly. Then a guest named Ryan Foster made the mistake of preparing to assault a young woman in that hotel, and Harrison did not stop at stopping him. He killed him, and then he did something far more revealing. He dismembered the body into 9 pieces, bagged it, and put it out with the trash, following a method his father had taught him in another life. He was not good at it, and the show made a point of that. He left a single spot of blood on a ceiling. He tied his garbage bags in a distinctive way, fastening them around themselves, and Claudette Wallace found the rest of the bags at the landfill specifically because she noticed that knot. What saved him was not skill, it was his father arriving in the city and quietly removing the evidence, followed later by his father framing a woman for the murder in order to close the case in the only direction that did not lead home. Harrison finished the season by walking into the most dangerous building in New York, dressed as a catering waiter, opening a sealed vault, and putting a syringe into a billionaire so that his father could get onto his feet. He then went home and danced with his girlfriend. That is the young man who is now carrying a firearm on behalf of the New York Police Department. The theories about what that means split along the same line the character himself has been walking since New Blood. The most popular reading is that Harrison joined the police for exactly the reason his father took a job inside a police department decades earlier, which is access. Dexter Morgan spent decades inside Miami Metro looking at case files, walking through crime scenes, and knowing what the police knew before the police finished knowing it. That position was the engine of his entire operation. Harrison in uniform is the same idea in a more direct form, and if he has worked out that he cannot stop doing what he does, then standing inside the system is the most rational choice available to him. The second reading treats it as penance. Harrison killed a man and let someone else take the blame for it, whether or not he understands how that happened. Joining the police is the sort of thing a young man does when he wants the structure, the rules, and the sense that his violence has been placed inside a container built by other people. That version is more hopeful and considerably less stable because containers built by other people do not hold when the person inside them meets a case that touches his father. A third reading treats the badge as the completion of a pattern the franchise has been building since the beginning. Harry Morgan was a police officer. Dexter worked inside a police department as a blood analyst. Harrison now wears the uniform. 3 generations of the same family have found their way into law enforcement, and every one of them has used the position to do something the department would never sanction. Under that reading, the code has not been inherited as a philosophy at all. It has been inherited as a career path, a much bleaker idea, and much more in keeping with how this show treats family. The woman standing next to him in one of those photographs matters just as much. Nona Parker Johnson joins the cast as Fiona Mixon, described as a training officer working in the homicide unit and a new love interest for Harrison. She is also the daughter of the season's new homicide captain, played by Bokeem Woodbine, a character described as a bulldog. Harrison Morgan is dating someone who is learning to investigate murders, whose father runs the unit investigating murders, in a city where his father commits them. The theory writes itself, and the show has already run a version of it. Deborah Morgan spent 8 seasons as a homicide detective, sitting beside a brother who was the killer she was hunting, and the eventual collision destroyed her completely. Putting that dynamic on the next generation, with a girlfriend instead of a sister, gives the writers everything that worked about it, with none of the audience's protective feelings attached. Fiona Mixon can be lost. Deborah could not, until she was. The more paranoid version of that theory suggests Fiona is not a coincidence at all. A trainee in a homicide unit that is actively working the Prater killings, dating the son of a man who was present in that building, is either the luckiest accident in the season or an assignment. Nothing in the official material supports that reading, and it remains speculation, but the fan community has latched onto it because this show has always been fond of relationships that begin as surveillance. Lila did it. Miguel did it in his own way. Charlie spent an entire season doing it. Fiona's arrival also creates a quieter mystery, which is what happened to Gigi. Emily Kimball's character was Harrison's girlfriend at the close of the first season, and the last image of the pair of them dancing together was one of the few warm beats in the whole finale. The new material introduces a different love interest, which suggests that relationship ended somewhere inside the time jump. The gentle theory is that it simply ran its course, the way relationships do over several years. The darker theory notes that this franchise has an unbroken record with the women who get close to the Morgan men, and that Rita, Deborah, Lumen, and Angela all paid for proximity in one way or another. Paramount's description of the new season includes one detail that most coverage skipped past, and it may be the most important sentence available about Harrison. It states that he continues to pursue his own sense of justice alongside his father, not separately from him, alongside him. That phrasing suggests the season is not building toward a son who discovers what his father is, because he already knows. It is building toward two people who both know, working in the same city, one of them carrying a badge. If that is accurate, the show is doing something it has never attempted. Dexter has never had a partner who shared his blood, understood his method, and had legal authority. He has spent 4 series lying to police officers. He has never had one on his side. The obvious theory is that Harrison becomes the person who steers investigations away from his father, quietly, from the inside, which would make him complicit in a way that no amount of good intention can undo. The unresolved Ryan Foster case sits underneath all of this, like a floorboard nobody has checked. On paper, it is closed. Mia Lapierre was arrested with the victim's watch among her trophies and died before she could contest it. Exactly the kind of tidy conclusion police departments accept. Wallace never accepted it. She said openly that the evidence sat wrong, and she is still in that precinct. If Mia Lapierre is alive and back in New York, then the woman who took the fall for Harrison's only murder is walking around the same city as the officer who committed it, and there is no version of that arrangement that stays quiet for 10 episodes. Elsa Rivera is another piece worth watching. Harrison's friend from the hotel was the reason his sense of justice sharpened in the first place, particularly through her trouble with an abusive landlord, and the character is expected back. She represents the version of Harrison that helps people without killing them, which makes her useful to the writers as a measuring stick. What happens to her tends to determine what Harrison becomes. The gap in his record is the part nobody can fill in yet, and it is where most of the speculation lives. Harrison has killed twice on screen. He shot his father in the chest in Iron Lake, and he killed Ryan Foster in a hotel room in New York. Both times, the show framed it as a young man losing control rather than choosing, and both times, somebody older cleaned up the consequences. What the audience has no way of knowing is whether anything happened during the years between the 2 seasons, and a police academy is not a place that reduces a person's exposure to violence. The theory that he has killed again during the time jump is popular and impossible to test. The version of it that fits the character best suggests he did it once, quietly, decided it was intolerable, and joined the department as a response. The version that fits this franchise best suggests he has developed a routine and has not told his father about it. There is a third possibility that several fans prefer, and it holds that he has kept the line clean for years, and that the season is about the first pressure heavy enough to break it. One of the new photographs places him in an elevator, a small detail with a long shadow. The hotel where the first season began, where Ryan Foster died, and where Harrison's whole spiral started, is a building full of them, and the show used those confined spaces repeatedly to trap him with his own decisions. Putting him back in one, now in uniform, reads as deliberate composition rather than coincidence. The practical question is what a badge actually gives him. Police officers can look at case files, they can walk into scenes, they can ask questions in a professional capacity that would be suspicious coming from anyone else, and they can hear what the detectives in their own building are saying about an open investigation before any of it becomes public. Whether Harrison uses that for his father or against him is the central unresolved variable of the season, and both options are available to him from the same chair. The background check is the detail almost nobody talks about, and it may be the strangest thing about him wearing that badge at all. Becoming a police officer requires an extensive review of a person's history, and Harrison Morgan's history is remarkable. His mother was murdered by the Trinity Killer when he was a toddler, and he was found sitting in her blood. He was raised in Argentina by a woman who is not related to him. He turned up in a small town in upstate New York as a teenager, where the local police chief investigated him, where a man he knew was killed, and where his own father was shot in a cell. Any competent review would surface most of that. What follows from that is uncomfortable in a way the show may well intend. Either the department looked at all of it and decided a young man with that history deserved a chance, a kind reading and consistent with how the first season treated him, or somebody smoothed the process. Dexter has money now, and a dead billionaire's resources, and a track record of manipulating official paperwork going back 20 years. A father who quietly cleared his son's path into a police department would be doing exactly what Harry Morgan did for Dexter when he arranged the rest of his life around a compulsion, and neither man would consider it interference. His history with drugs deserves a mention here as well, because the first season established it clearly and then largely set it aside once his father arrived. He was using when he killed Ryan Foster, and the show connected the two directly. A young officer working homicide-adjacent shifts in a city with two active serial killers, dating a colleague, and carrying a secret about a murder he committed is a young man under an enormous amount of pressure, and relapse is one of the more likely quiet turns the writers could take. What the badge really leaves behind is the question this franchise has been circling since a small boy sat in a shipping container of blood. Dexter has always insisted that what happened to Harrison as an infant made him what he is, and Harry's entire code was built on the belief that a dangerous thing can be pointed at something useful instead of being stopped. Harrison in a police uniform is that belief taken to its conclusion. Either the code works and produces a man who protects people, or the code was always just a permission slip, and the second generation is about to prove it in public with a department badge to hide behind. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one detective standing between the Morgan family and everything falling apart, and she has already inherited the case that killed the last man who chased Dexter. She was in the vault. She put a hat back on Angel Batista's body, and she has never once believed the story she was handed. Section 6. The detective who put the hat back on. The quietest moment in the Season 1 finale involved no violence at all. Claudette Wallace walked into Leon Prater's vault, found Angel Batista dead on the floor, and put his hat back on him. Katia Saraf, who plays her, later explained what that gesture was built to mean. Earlier in the season, Wallace had effectively stripped Batista of his standing, treating him as a retired officer with a personal obsession rather than a colleague with a case. Putting the hat back was her giving the title back to him, in private, with nobody watching. It was an apology to a man who could no longer hear it. That single beat is the foundation of every theory about where this character goes next, because it establishes something about her that separates her from every police officer who has ever pursued Dexter Morgan. Wallace is capable of admitting she was wrong. Maria LaGuerta never quite got there. Dokes was right from the start and had no way to prove it. Batista spent an entire season being correct and being dismissed. Wallace is the first investigator in this franchise who has looked at the aftermath of her own certainty and revised it. She arrived in the first episode as a detective standing at a landfill, staring at garbage bags, and she solved the mystery of where the rest of the body was by looking at how the bags had been tied. Harrison had fastened the tops of the bags around themselves in a distinctive way, and she recognized that pattern well enough to find the others. The show gave her a habit to signal how her mind works, which is that she plays the Bee Gees while she thinks. Saraf explained the reasoning behind it, describing 70s disco as music that asks less of the listener, with a rhythm steady enough that everything else in her head can move underneath it. Wallace does not tune the world out. She sets a tempo and then works inside it. By the second episode, she had already looked at the room where Ryan Foster died and understood that someone had cleaned it. And by the 8th, she was digging into the history of Miami Metro. What kept her from the truth was never her intelligence. It was that the truth required believing something no evidence supported, and that is exactly what Batista was asking her to do. He came to New York with a theory built from a phone call from Angela Bishop and years of quiet doubt going back to LaGuardia, and what he had was a conviction rather than a case. Wallace does not act on convictions. That professional discipline is the reason she was still alive at the end of the season, and Batista was not. Saraf has talked openly about where that leaves Wallace going into the new season, and her description is about as clear a roadmap as anyone has offered. She explained that finding Batista's body was the moment Wallace understood she had been treating something as pure logic when it might have needed to be personal, and that the finale makes it clear Wallace is going to take on the work he did not get to finish. She also framed the seasons ahead in the simplest possible terms. Dexter will try to get away with murder, and Wallace will try to catch him or bring some form of justice if she ever learns who he really is and can prove it. The proof problem is the interesting part, because the vault has handed her more of it than she can possibly know yet. That room contained a billionaire's private archive of murder, and the pieces of it that came out of Dexter's own history are the ones that should frighten Dexter. The blood slides and the knife seized in Florida are not decoration. They are evidence from a closed case that was officially pinned on a dead police sergeant, and they are now sitting inside a New York homicide scene with a chain of custody that makes no sense. The theory that follows from that is the most straightforward one available, and it does not require anyone to have a hunch about anything. Wallace does not need to suspect Dexter Morgan to reopen the Bay Harbor Butcher file. She only needs to catalog Prater's collection properly and ask why a man in Manhattan owned physical evidence from Miami. The moment she pulls that thread, the man Batista was chasing stops being a retired officer's fixation and becomes a documented question in an active investigation, and Batista's death gives her every reason in the world to pull it. A second piece of paperwork in that room has her name written all over it. Dexter deliberately left the dossier on Dawn Frampt where the police would find it, and Melvin Oliva pushed it in front of her. That was a gift, and gifts have origins. A detective as careful as Wallace will eventually work out that someone in that building wanted her to have the identity of the New York Ripper, which means someone in that building understood what she had spent her career on. That is a very short list of people, and every name on it was either dead or standing in a catering uniform. Set photography has already confirmed that the Ripper storyline runs directly through her. Photographers caught Wallace filming a scene face-to-face with Brian Cox's Dawn Frampt, which means the confrontation she has wanted for decades happens on screen this season. The theories about that meeting are some of the most interesting in the entire conversation, because nothing about the character suggests it goes the way she wants. The first theory holds that catching him is the worst thing that could happen to her. Wallace has been defined by an open case for most of her working life. It is the thing she returns to when everything else is quiet, the reason she keeps a certain kind of focus, and possibly the reason she is good at her job at all. Handing her the answer removes the structure she has been built around, and the season could be about a detective discovering that the hole in her life was never shaped like an arrest. The second theory is that Frampt runs the interview rather than submitting to it. This is a man who has spent 40 years calling the families of his victims, describing what he did in detail, and hanging up. Everything the show has established about him says he enjoys the aftermath more than the act, and the aftermath is exactly what a police interview provides. A frail old man in a wheelchair who cannot be charged without evidence, sitting across a table from the one person who has wanted him for decades, has more power in that room than she does. The theory suggests he spends the season feeding her, slowly, and steering her wherever he wants her to go. The most alarming version of that idea holds that he steers her toward Dexter. It is speculation, and nothing has confirmed it, but the pieces sit uncomfortably close together. People notice when professionals investigate them, particularly people who have spent decades avoiding exactly that. If Frampt worked out that a billionaire with a serial killer club had gone looking for him, and if he has any information about who was in that club, then he is holding something that turns Wallace's greatest triumph into the beginning of a much bigger case. Then there is the new captain. Bokeem Woodbine joins the season as Captain Mixon, described as a bulldog, and the first look images show him in conversation with his detectives. Every theory involving him assumes friction, because a captain who is characterized that way exists in a police story for one reason, which is to apply pressure. The Prater investigation is a nightmare of publicity. A dead billionaire, a murdered retired officer from another state, and a room full of unsolved cases. A captain, under that kind of scrutiny, wants closures, and he wants them in an order that makes the department look competent. That produces the theory a lot of longtime viewers consider almost inevitable. Wallace ends up working the butcher question off the books. She has watched what happened to the last person who pursued it officially, and got laughed out of every room he entered. She has a captain who needs clean results, and a case that cannot produce them quickly. The franchise has run this before with Maria LaGuardia, who investigated Dexter privately, correctly, and alone, and whose private investigation is precisely what got her killed. Wallace pursuing this quietly is the most realistic path available to her and the most dangerous one. The counterweight to all of this is her partner. Melvin Oliva has been positioned throughout as the skeptical one, the detective who does not chase ghosts and who keeps her tethered to what the evidence supports. He was also the one who put the Frampt file in her hands, which means he is not incapable of following an idea. Several theories argue that Oliva is the real threat to Dexter this season, on the grounds that this show has always been undone by the person nobody was watching. Dokes got there by smelling something wrong. Quinn got there by refusing to let a sketch go. LaGuardia got there through a single blood slide. The pattern says, the danger arrives sideways. One theory about Harrison belongs in this section rather than in his own, because it depends entirely on Wallace. She already treated Harrison as a primary suspect once, and she never accepted the conclusion that closed his case. Now his name sits on a duty roster in the same department. A detective who quietly doubts a closed murder and then watches the original suspect's son put on a uniform has an enormous amount of motive to look again, and Harrison is a far softer target than his father. Dexter has decades of practice. Harrison left blood on a ceiling. One detail from the finale has generated a surprising amount of theory traffic, and it involves how the police found Batista in the first place. Dexter did not leave quietly. On his way out of the building, he pulled the alarm on the vault, specifically so that officers would go down there and find the body. That was a decision made for Batista's sake, so that a good man would not be left in a locked room, and it was the closest thing to grief the character allowed himself all season. It also created a record. Alarms have timestamps. A vault that opens and closes leaves a log. Somebody triggered that alarm after Prater was already dead, which means the department has documentary evidence that a third person was inside that building during the relevant window and chose to alert them before leaving. A detective who thinks the way Wallace thinks does not read that as a malfunction. She reads it as a message, and messages have senders. The other loose thread from that night is the guest list. Prater held a black tie gala upstairs while all of this happened, with a room full of wealthy attendees, catering staff, and security, all of whom will be interviewed. Harrison was in that building wearing a catering uniform. Somebody hired the catering company, somebody kept a staffing sheet, and a man who does not belong on it walked through a house full of people who noticed the host being late for his own speech. That is the kind of ordinary paperwork that has undone more real investigations than any forensic breakthrough. Her partnership with Oliva is the last piece worth watching, and the finale gave it a lighter note than anything else in the episode. After the vault, the two of them ended up dancing to the Bee Gees, a small human beat, in the middle of a bloodbath, and it established that these two people actually like each other. That matters because this franchise has a habit of using partnerships as pressure points. If Wallace starts working the butcher question privately, she has to decide whether to bring Oliva with her, and the decision either gives her an ally or gives her a witness. What Wallace really leaves behind is a version of the pursuit this franchise has not tried before. Dokes chased Dexter on instinct and lost. LaGuardia chased him on evidence and lost. Batista chased him on personal history and lost. Wallace is the first person to come at him with all three, plus a case file, plus a body in a vault, plus a young officer in her own precinct who cannot lie nearly as well as his father. And she is the first one who has demonstrated that she can be wrong about someone and correct herself in time to matter. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Wallace is not the only person who might come looking. One of the first look photographs shows a face nobody expected to see in New York. A Miami detective who spent years convinced Dexter Morgan was hiding something and never managed to prove a single piece of it. Section 7. The Miami detective who never let it go. Among the first look photographs released for the new season is one that most casual viewers would scroll past and that longtime fans stopped on immediately. Desmond Harrington, back as Joey Quinn in New York, apparently working. Quinn appeared only briefly in the first season, a short cameo in the 8th episode where he and Vince Masuka turned up in Miami while Batista was chasing his theory. Bringing him to New York, in a photograph that suggests actual screen time, is one of the loudest signals the season has given about which old wounds it plans to open. Quinn matters because of a specific piece of history that this franchise has never resolved, and because he is the last living person from Miami Metro who ever came close to the truth on his own. James Dokes is dead. Maria LaGuardia is dead. Angel Batista is dead on the floor of a billionaire's vault. Deborah is gone. Of everyone who worked in that building and looked sideways at the quiet blood analyst in the corner, Joey Quinn is what remains. His suspicions started in the 5th season, in the aftermath of Rita's murder, and they started from something concrete rather than a feeling. Dexter had spent the previous season inside Arthur Mitchell's life under a false name, presenting himself to the Trinity Killer's family as a man called Kyle Butler. After Arthur's death, the police produced a composite sketch of Kyle Butler based on descriptions from the family, and Quinn looked at that sketch and saw Dexter Morgan in it. He pursued that. He went to Jonah Mitchell, Arthur's son, and tried to make the connection stick. When the official route led nowhere, he did something that tells the audience everything it needs to know about him. He brought in Stan Liddy, a corrupt narcotics officer, and paid him to run surveillance on a colleague. That decision is the origin of one of the longest-running theories in the entire fandom. Quinn eventually pulled back from the arrangement, mostly out of guilt, because by then he was involved with Deborah and could not square what he was doing to her brother. Liddy did not pull back. He kept working the case alone, gathered enough material to be dangerous, and confronted Dexter directly. Dexter killed him, and because Liddy's phone records were full of calls to Quinn, and because a drop of Liddy's blood ended up on Quinn's shoe from the night he approached the van, Quinn became a suspect in the death of the man he had hired to investigate Dexter Morgan. He was never able to prove anything, and he was nearly destroyed by trying. The question the fan community has argued about for something like 16 years is whether he ever fully let go of it. There is a persistent theory that Quinn kept a private belief about Dexter for the rest of his career, never spoke it aloud again, because speaking it aloud had cost him everything once already, and quietly filed it away. The new season is the first realistic opportunity the franchise has had to confirm or kill that idea. What makes his return so dangerous is the information gap he is walking into. As of the end of the first season, Quinn does not know Dexter Morgan is alive. Batista went to New York without telling anyone in Miami what he was actually doing there, kept the details of his theory to himself, and died before he could report back. In the finale, Quinn called Batista to ask him to come home, unaware that Batista was already lying dead in a room full of a stranger's trophies. That phone call is the whole engine of the theory, because Quinn will find out what happened, and when he does, the first person he will speak to is Claudette Wallace. The two of them already talked during the first season, in the 8th episode, when Batista's investigation crossed into New York jurisdiction. They have a professional relationship. A retired captain from her department dies in another city, and the detective handling that death is someone Quinn has already met. Those conversations happen, and the moment Wallace explains why Batista was in New York, Quinn hears the phrase Bay Harbor Butcher attached to the name Dexter Morgan from a source that is not himself for the first time in his life. That is the piece the theory community keeps circling, because it changes the nature of his old suspicion completely. For all that time, Quinn has had an instinct with nothing behind it. Now he has a dead colleague, a detective from another department who will confirm that colleague's theory, and a memory of a police sketch that looked like a man who is supposedly dead. Everything he was mocked for is suddenly corroborated by someone else, and unlike Batista, he has a jurisdiction, a badge, and access to Miami's own files. Those files are the practical threat. The original Bay Harbor Butcher case lives in Miami. LaGuardia's private investigation lives in Miami, including whatever she assembled before she died. The bloodslide that started her down that road came from Miami. And Vince Masuka, who processed more of Dexter's work than any other human being alive without ever knowing what he was looking at, is still there. Quinn coming to New York with even part of that history in a briefcase is a materially different problem than Batista arriving with a hunch and a Cuban sandwich. One specific piece of evidence sitting in a New York evidence locker connects directly to all of this, and it is the detail that makes the most cautious theorists nervous. Dexter escaped the vault by using Batista's phone to call Harrison. That means the last outgoing call from a murdered police captain's mobile went to the son of the man that captain was investigating. Phone records are the least glamorous and most reliable evidence in modern police work, and that log exists whether anyone has looked at it yet or not. Nobody needs a hunch to find it. They only need a subpoena and a reason. The theories about what Quinn does with all of this split into two clean halves, and the split says a lot about how the audience reads the character. The first half expects revenge. Batista and Quinn worked together for years, and Batista was one of the few people in that department who treated Quinn decently through his worst stretch. A man who once hired a corrupt cop to surveil a colleague is not a man with strong feelings about procedure, and the theory holds that Quinn comes north to settle something rather than to build a case. The second half expects an alliance, and it is the more interesting argument. The person who actually killed Angel Batista was Leon Prater. Dexter tried to save him, offered himself in his place, and then killed the man who did it. If Quinn ever learns that sequence accurately, he is looking at a situation where the serial killer he always suspected avenged his friend, and the billionaire who pulled the trigger is at the bottom of the harbor. Quinn has bent rules for less. The theory suggests he arrives to destroy Dexter and stays because destroying Dexter would not actually serve anyone he cares about. A further version of that has real support in the older material. Quinn was never a clean police officer. He took money in the 4th season. He worked with Liddy. He has a documented history of deciding privately what justice looks like and acting on it outside the system. That is not far from the code Harry Morgan built, and this franchise has always been interested in police officers who arrive at Dexter's conclusions without Dexter's compulsion. The Kyle Butler thread carries one additional hazard that connects Quinn's return to the Morgan family directly. Arthur Mitchell's surviving family met Dexter face-to-face under a false name. Jonah Mitchell is still alive somewhere in this fictional world, and fans spent months speculating that he might be involved in the New York Ripper mystery before the casting announcement ruled it out. If Quinn revisits the Butler sketch, Jonah becomes relevant again because he is the only living witness who could identify a man the world believes is dead. Masuka is the quieter risk in that direction. C.S. Lee's cameo established that he is still in Miami and still working, and Masuka's particular talent has always been noticing anomalies in physical evidence while completely failing to understand their meaning. He is the person most likely to look at something from the Prater scene, recognize a technique, and say so out loud in a room where the wrong person is listening. Deborah is the emotional lever underneath all of it, and the theories that account for her tend to be the most convincing. Quinn was involved with her for a long stretch of the original series, wanted to marry her, and lost her in a way he never fully understood. She died in a hospital bed after a series of events that Dexter set in motion, and Quinn was never told the truth about any of it. Anyone who learns, 20 years later, that the brother of the woman he loved was the reason she ended up in that room is not going to treat the discovery as a professional matter. A much smaller detail could do enormous damage, and it involves recognition. Quinn knew Harrison as a small child in Miami. He was in and out of Dexter's house during the years when Harrison was a toddler, before Rita died and the family scattered. A Miami detective looking at a New York police roster and finding a young officer named Harrison Morgan does not need a forensic breakthrough to feel the floor move. The name alone would be enough, and it is sitting in a public personnel system. Predictions about how Quinn's arc resolves tend to land in one of three places. In the first, he becomes the season's proof that Dexter's past cannot be outrun, pushing the investigation forward from a direction Wallace could never reach because she has no Miami history. In the second, he becomes the casualty that raises the stakes, following Dokes and LaGuardia and Batista into the long list of officers who got close enough to matter. In the third, and the one a surprising number of viewers want, he becomes the first police officer in the history of this franchise to work out exactly what Dexter is and decide to leave it alone. That last version is not sentimental. It is the logical endpoint of everything the character has ever done. Quinn has always been the officer who decides for himself what deserves punishment and what does not, and he has already lived through what happens when a man pursues Dexter Morgan officially. A cop who watched Liddy die and took the blame for it, and who then lost Deborah, has every reason to conclude that the cost of the truth is higher than the value of it. The one thing working in Dexter's favor is how thoroughly the first season buried the trail on the Miami side. Batista told nobody. He kept his theory to himself in Florida, gave Quinn and Masuka nothing to work with, and traveled north on his own time to chase something he could not put in a report. That silence protected Dexter completely, while Batista was alive, and it is the reason Quinn spent the finale making a friendly phone call to a man who was already dead, rather than mobilizing a department. The theory that Batista's discretion continues to protect Dexter after his death is a sad reading of the season, because the loyalty that kept the case quiet was loyalty to a friendship Dexter had already destroyed. One version of Quinn's return requires none of this and would be considerably worse for Dexter. He may not come for Batista, or for Deborah, or for a sketch he saw 16 years ago. He may simply come because a former colleague died in another state, and somebody from Miami has to handle the arrangements, sign the paperwork, and collect the personal effects. Retired captains have belongings. Investigators keep notes. Batista had been working the case for months and traveling with purpose, and whatever he wrote down or photographed or recorded went somewhere after he stopped breathing. Handing that material to the one man in Florida who already suspected the answer is not a plot twist. It is just what happens when someone dies away from home. What Quinn's return leaves behind is the closing of a circle the franchise opened almost 20 years ago. Every person from Dexter's Miami life who suspected him has died holding that suspicion, and the show has treated that pattern as a kind of grim joke about how well he has been protected by other people's disbelief. Quinn is the last one standing, and he is arriving in a city where the evidence is no longer thin. The detective in charge is better than the ones he worked with, and the man he suspects has a son in uniform whose phone number is sitting in the call log of a dead captain's mobile. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While the police work through a billionaire's basement, somebody new starts calling them. A voice on the line names a person in the city, promises exactly what will happen to them, and then goes out and does it, over and over, in a way the department has no way to stop. Section 8. The voice on the phone. Nobody can trace. Paramount's official description of the new season puts Dexter between two killers. One of them is notorious, and that one is the New York Ripper. The other is described as terrorizing the city in a way nobody ever anticipated, and that phrasing was chosen carefully. It does not say the killer is more violent, or more prolific, or harder to find. It says the method itself is something the city has not seen before. Dan Stevens plays him. The character is named Owen Stark, and he operates as the five-borough killer. The description released with the casting is short, and does most of the work on its own. He telephones the police with threats of violence against innocent people, and then he goes out and follows through on them. He tells them what he is going to do. He tells them who it will happen to, and then he does it anyway, and the department cannot stop it. The obvious comparison, and the one everyone reached for immediately, is the Zodiac. A killer who communicates with law enforcement while remaining unidentified is one of the most disturbing real-world patterns in criminal history, precisely because it turns every warning into a demonstration of helplessness. The theory community picked up on that instantly, but the more interesting observations have been about what a killer like that does to Dexter Morgan specifically, because Stark is built to break the way Dexter works. Everything about Dexter's method depends on time. He researches a target. He confirms guilt to his own satisfaction, usually more than once. He follows them, learns their routine, finds a location, prepares plastic, prepares tools, and controls every variable he can before anyone dies. That process is not a preference. It is the only reason he has survived 20 years of doing this, and the code Harry built is entirely dependent on having enough time to be certain. Stark removes the time. A killer who announces a murder before committing it creates a deadline, and a deadline is the one thing Dexter cannot negotiate with. The theory that follows is that this is the storyline that forces him to work badly, rushed, in public, without proper preparation. Every catastrophic mistake in this franchise has come from Dexter acting under pressure rather than under plan, and the season appears to be building a villain whose entire function is to apply that pressure continuously for 10 episodes. A second layer to the theory has become the most popular reading of the season's structure, and it connects Stark directly to Frampt. Both men communicate by telephone. The Ripper spent decades calling the families of people he had murdered, describing what he had done in detail, and hanging up. Stark calls the police and describes what he is about to do. Those are two versions of the same compulsion, separated by which end of the crime the caller wants to relive, and this show does not usually put two nearly identical behaviors in one season by accident. The most developed version of that theory holds that Stark learned it from Frampt, a student, a protege, or a relative carrying the family habit forward. Long before the casting announcements, fans had already been speculating that the Ripper storyline would end up being about succession, on the reasonable grounds that an elderly killer with no physical ability left would need someone else to do the work. Frampt in a wheelchair and a new caller terrorizing the city in the same season is exactly the shape that theory predicted. The darkest variation flips the relationship completely, and it is the theory that has gained the most ground over the summer. Stark is not a student, he is a survivor. Somewhere in the Ripper's list of victims is a family that received those phone calls for years, and one of the people who picked up that phone as a child grew into someone who does this now. That would give the season a bleak spine, with Dexter caught between a monster who created a monster and having no way to punish the first one for the second one. It would also fold neatly into the franchise's oldest idea, that violence in childhood produces violence in adulthood, and that Dexter has been using that idea as an excuse since the first episode of the original series. Either version produces the same practical situation in the middle of the season, and that is a convergence. Two killers connected by method, one immobile and one active, with a third killer hunting both of them, and a homicide unit chasing all three. The most common prediction is that Stark eventually goes after Frampt, either to prove something or to finish something, and that Dexter arrives at the moment he has to decide whether to let one monster remove another or take both himself. A separate theory covers how Stark gets away with it repeatedly, and it is the one that would create the most trouble for Harrison. A caller who names a specific victim in advance and still succeeds is a caller who knows what the police will do in response. Warning: the department is only a workable strategy if the warning does not meaningfully increase the risk, which suggests either extraordinary luck or inside knowledge. That theory puts Stark close to law enforcement, whether through employment, family, or access, and it means the precinct Harrison now works in could be the leak. That would sit comfortably beside the new captain. Bokeem Woodbine's Captain Mixon is described as a bulldog, arriving in a unit already buried under the Prater investigation, and now facing a killer who calls ahead. A department under that kind of pressure produces exactly the environment where somebody gets promoted for the wrong reasons and somebody else gets pushed out. And the theory holds that the chaos is what allows Dexter to operate at all this season. The casting itself carries information worth reading. This franchise has developed a specific habit of hiring actors with enormous charm to play its worst people. John Lithgow played Arthur Mitchell as a nervous father before he played him as a monster. Peter Dinklage played Prater as a delighted enthusiast rather than a thug. Dan Stevens has built a career on precisely that combination of warmth and something wrong underneath it, and casting him as a man who calls the police to schedule murders suggests the show wants Stark to be enjoyable rather than merely frightening. Another theory deserves attention because it would explain the season's official framing more completely than any of the others. Stark may be hunting Dexter. The city has already lived through the dark passenger killings, the Prater scandal, and a body count that has never been fully accounted for. A killer who craves attention and audience would be aware that somebody in New York has been quietly removing other killers, and that somebody is the only person in the city whose attention would be worth having. Under that reading, the escalating calls are not about the police at all. They are advertisements aimed at one man, and the innocent people dying are the cost of getting his attention. That would explain the strange wording in the official description one more time. Terrorizing New York in ways nobody ever anticipated does not quite describe a Zodiac imitator, since that pattern is well known. It describes something the audience has not seen, a killer who has worked out that the most effective way to reach the Bay Harbor butcher is to make him unable to look away. The name itself has generated a theory that seems obvious once somebody says it out loud. New York City has 5 boroughs. A killer who calls himself the 5-borough killer is either announcing that he works across the whole city, which every serial killer in the show's history has effectively done, or he is announcing a pattern with a fixed number in it. 1 victim per borough would give the police a countdown they can read, and it would give the season a natural structure, since a pattern with 5 slots in it can be tracked and interrupted. Patterns are also the only route Dexter has to finding him. This is worth sitting with, because it changes what the season has to be. Dexter's usual process starts with a name. He gets it from a case file, from a police database, from a conversation at work, or in this case, from a folder in a dead man's vault. He then confirms guilt and moves. Stark offers none of that. He is a voice on a telephone with no face, no address, and no file, which means Dexter cannot begin his process at all until somebody does actual investigative work. That leads to what a lot of viewers consider the most likely spine of the season. Dexter has to use Harrison. His son now works inside a department that is receiving those phone calls, logging them, recording them, and analyzing them. Everything Dexter needs to identify Stark exists inside a building he cannot enter and a system he cannot access, and his son carries the credentials for both. The moment he asks Harrison for that help, he has recruited a police officer into a murder investigation being run by a serial killer, and there is no version of that conversation that leaves the young man's career intact. The original series solved this same problem once, and it did it beautifully. Arthur Mitchell was invisible for years because he moved between states and killed in a repeating sequence that nobody had assembled. Dexter found him by recognizing the pattern in old case files while sitting at his desk at Miami Metro, doing the job the police were paid to do and failing to do. That is the shape the Stark storyline appears to be built for, with the enormous difference that Dexter no longer has a desk, a badge, or a lab, and the only person he knows inside the system is the one person he should be protecting from it. The recordings themselves are the other likely mechanism, and they connect the two villains again. A killer who telephones a police department is generating evidence with every call. Voices can be analyzed, background noise can be located, and speech patterns can be compared. Wallace has spent decades listening to recordings of one killer taunting his victims' families. Handing that same detective a fresh set of tapes from a new caller is either the cruelest thing the writers could do to her or the single greatest advantage she has ever had, and quite possibly both. One last theory about Stark would upend the season's structure entirely, and enough people believe it to be worth including. It suggests that he gets caught early, or killed early, and that the notorious killer described in the logline is not the one the season is actually about. Announcing two villains, and then removing one in the first stretch of episodes would be an aggressive move, but this show has done exactly that before. Neil Patrick Harris, Kristen Ritter, and David Dastmalchian were all announced as major additions to the first season, and all three were dispatched inside a handful of episodes. A useful reminder that a casting announcement in this franchise is not a promise of survival. The other consequence of a killer who works this way is what it does to the city around him and to Dexter's ability to move through it. A department receiving credible advance warnings about murders responds with saturation, more patrols, more cameras reviewed, more overtime, more attention paid to anything unusual happening after dark. That is the worst possible environment for a man who needs empty buildings, quiet streets, and a boat nobody is watching. The theory that Stark makes Dexter's own work nearly impossible for a stretch of the season is one of the more elegant predictions available, because it means the villain damages him without ever knowing he exists. It also puts pressure on the one part of Dexter's routine he has never had to think about, and that is disposal. He built his method in Miami around deep water and a boat he owned, and the first season handed him a replacement in the form of a chartered yacht taken from a dead billionaire. A harbor under increased police attention, in a city where a homicide unit is already searching for a killer who announces himself, is not a place where a middle-aged man can move heavy bags at night without eventually being noticed by somebody with a camera. What Stark really leaves behind is the first real test of Dexter's method, rather than his morality. Prater tested his ego, Batista tested his history, Charlie tested his cover, Mia tested his loyalty. Stark tests the machinery, the slow, careful process that has kept him alive since he was a young man in Miami, and he does it by making every hour count. Dexter has always been able to wait, and this is a season built to make waiting cost lives. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Two killers, a homicide unit, a son in uniform, and a woman he cannot read. The official description of the season names something else as Dexter's greatest enemy, and it is not a person at all. Section 9, The Enemy. The show named out loud. The official logline for the new season lists the two killers Dexter is caught between, and then it adds a third threat in the same sentence, described as his greatest enemy yet. A midlife crisis. That is an unusual thing for a network to put in a press release about a serial killer drama, and the fan community treated it as the single most revealing line in all the promotional material, because it is the only part of the description that is about Dexter rather than about the people hunting or being hunted. The setup for it arrived in the last 30 seconds of the first season. After disposing of Prater's body out near the Statue of Liberty, Dexter delivered a closing monologue in which he stopped fighting himself. He said he was exactly who he needed to be, and then he added that he was exactly who the audience wanted him to be, and he looked directly into the camera while he said it. The Dexter shows have always played with glances at the lens, but that was the first time in the entire franchise that the character addressed the people watching him. Readings of that moment have not settled and probably never will. The most common reading is that the show was acknowledging its own arrangement with its audience out loud. 20 years of viewers have wanted this character to keep killing, have been disappointed when the show tried to make him stop, and rejected the ending that punished him for it. New Blood ended with Dexter dying at his son's hands, and the reaction to that ending is a significant part of why resurrection exists at all. Looking into the camera and saying he will be what they want is the show admitting that the audience is the reason he cannot be redeemed. The more practical theory treats that line as a warning about narration. Dexter's voiceover has always been the most trusted element of these shows, the one place the audience assumed it was getting the truth. A character who has just acknowledged that he performs for the people watching is a character whose narration can no longer be taken at face value, and several fans expect the new season to exploit that, letting Dexter tell the audience things that turn out to be what he wants to believe, rather than what is happening. Underneath the fourth wall break was the actual conclusion he reached, and it is the part that matters for the midlife crisis storyline. He admitted, in his own head, that solitude no longer works for him. He said he needs Harrison, not simply as a son, but as someone he can talk to honestly. He said he needs people like Blessing Kamara and his family in his life. That is the opposite of everything the character believed for 8 seasons in Miami, where every relationship was cover and every friendship was maintenance. Blessing is the person that conclusion rests on, which is why his presence in the first look photographs made so many longtime viewers uneasy. He is a rideshare driver and Dexter's landlord, a kind man with a wife named Constance and a son who fed Dexter at his table and treated him like a neighbor. He has no idea what his tenant is. In the arithmetic of this franchise, a warm and completely innocent man who has become emotionally necessary to Dexter Morgan is not a supporting character. He is a countdown. The theories around him are grim and nearly unanimous. Rita was the version of this in Miami, and she ended up in a bathtub. Angela and Logan were the version of this in Iron Lake. Batista was the version of this last season, and the show killed him in the 9th episode specifically to demonstrate that being decent and being close to Dexter cannot both be survivable. A large portion of the audience expects Blessing or someone in his family to be the cost the new season charges, and the 5-borough killer provides an obvious mechanism because a killer who announces his victims in advance could name someone Dexter loves and then keep his promise. The other reading of the midlife crisis is far more literal, and it has the most textual support of any theory in this section. Dexter Morgan is in his mid-50s. He was shot in the chest by his own son, spent roughly 10 weeks in a coma, and the first season opened with him failing at physical therapy, unable to chase a suspect he had already identified because his body would not do it. That was not a temporary plot obstacle. It was the show establishing that the machine is wearing out. Everything Dexter does requires physical capability, subduing a grown adult, lifting a body, working quickly in a room he has to leave clean. He has always relied on being stronger and faster than his targets expect a quiet forensics technician to be, and that advantage has an expiration date. The theory holds that the new season is about him noticing the date approaching, and that Don Frampt exists in the story precisely to show him what waits at the end of it. That parallel is the most elegant idea in the entire Season 2 conversation. Frampt is a serial killer who stopped because his body stopped, and who now relives his work through phone calls because reliving it is all that remains available. Dexter is a serial killer with a damaged chest, a bad shoulder, and a son who has to help him escape rooms he cannot escape alone. Putting those two men in the same season and letting one look at the other is not a coincidence anybody believes. It is the season's actual subject, dressed up as a manhunt. A smaller theory attached to this carries real dread, If Dexter is confronting his own decline, then the most likely place he turns is Harrison, and the most likely thing he does is hand things over. He has already told the audience he needs his son as a confidant. Every version of that story ends with a father teaching a young man in a police uniform how to do this properly, which would make Harry Morgan's original decision the thing that repeats, rather than the thing that gets broken. Michael C. Hall has confirmed one production detail that most theories treat as a strong hint about tone. He has said he is working to bring back a version of the original show's title sequence for the new season. New Blood recreated it. Original Sin recreated it. Resurrection did not, and the absence was noticeable, since that morning routine of breakfast and shaving and getting dressed is the most recognizable thing the franchise ever made. The sequence works by showing a violent man performing an ordinary domestic life, with every mundane action shot like a small act of butchery. Bringing it back would signal that Dexter has a routine again, a home, a life stable enough to have a morning in it. That would fit the midlife crisis framing perfectly, because the sequence has always been about the gap between the life a person performs and the person performing it, and it would give the season a way to show the audience that Dexter is settled without saying it in dialogue. It also raises the obvious theory that the sequence will be used ironically, and that whatever domestic stability the opening credits promise will be dismantled by the finale. The identity question sits underneath all of this, and nobody has answered it. Dexter spent the first season using the name of the man he killed, moving through New York as Ronald Schmidt, and the time jump means he has been living somewhere, paying for something, and answering to a name for a number of years. The theories range from him settling into a job that gives him access, in the way Miami Metro once did, to living entirely off Prater's money, since he walked away with a dead billionaire's chartered yacht and whatever else was on it. The ghosts sit underneath all of it, and they are the part of the show most likely to expand. James Remar is confirmed back as Harry, and the first look material shows the two of them together. The first season used its imaginary company more aggressively than any previous Dexter series, and it also worked in archive footage of Deborah, LaGuardia, and Kurt Caldwell during the premiere. That gives the writers an enormous roster to draw from. The most popular theory about which ghost arrives next is also the most fitting. Leon Prater spent an entire season trying to convince Dexter that what he does is admirable rather than shameful, and he died being told he was wrong. He is the most recent voice in Dexter's head. He was the most articulate flatterer the character has ever met, and he is exactly the sort of company a man would keep during a midlife crisis about whether his life has meant anything. A billionaire enthusiast whispering encouragement while Dexter's body fails him would be the cruelest possible addition to the rotation, and that is usually a sign this show is about to do it. The name at the top of every wish list for that rotation is the one the show has been most careful with. Deborah Morgan has not come back as a speaking presence in the way she did throughout New Blood, and that restraint stands out against how freely the first season used everybody else. Jennifer Carpenter played that role as the harshest voice Dexter ever carried, a sister who called him every name he deserved, and a large portion of the audience considers her absence the most conspicuous gap in the new era. The explanations offered for why she has been held back are mostly practical. New Blood used her extensively, and repeating that immediately would have made Resurrection feel like a continuation of a story the audience had already rejected. Holding her in reserve gives the writers something to deploy at the exact moment Dexter is at his most self-satisfied, and a season built around a man deciding he has finally worked out who he is happens to be the ideal setting for the one person who would find that conclusion laughable. Blessing's household is the other thing worth tracking closely, because it is the only part of Dexter's life that contains no violence at all. His wife Constance and his son are established characters. The family has hosted Dexter at their table, and the first look photographs put Dexter and Blessing together again. Elsa Rivera remains in Harrison's orbit as well. Between them, those two households represent the entire argument the finale made about needing people, and they are the only pieces on the board that have nothing to defend themselves with. One theory about Blessing is more unsettling than any prediction about his death, and it holds that he finds out. He is an observant man who drives strangers for a living, notices things, and has spent a considerable amount of time in close quarters with a tenant whose story does not entirely add up. Dexter has never had a friend who was not either a colleague, a target, or a person he was managing. A neighbor who works out the truth and decides to keep sitting across the dinner table from him anyway would be new territory for this franchise, and it would be far more dangerous to Dexter's sense of himself than any detective. That admission is the vulnerability. A person who needs other people can be reached through them, and Dexter has spent the gap between seasons collecting exactly the sort of attachments that make him easy to reach. A son with a badge, a friend with a family, a woman he cannot read, a former enemy who knows what he is. The first season presented all of that as healing, and the theory that the second season presents the same arrangement as a liability is the most widely held prediction in the entire fan community, largely because this show has run that exact play 4 times and has never once let it end well. All of this adds up to a season built around a question the franchise has never asked directly. Every previous story put Dexter in danger from outside. Dokes was outside, Trinity was outside, Prater was outside. The midlife crisis framing points the threat inward for the first time, at a body that is failing, a compulsion that has outlived its usefulness, and a man who has just admitted out loud that he cannot do this alone anymore. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of this points at one larger question that has nothing to do with any single episode. There is a reason the new season arrives in October, a reason a prequel series was quietly ended to make room for it, and a reason nobody involved will stop mentioning a pilot that aired in October of 2006. Section 10. What the calendar is telling everybody. Clyde Phillips let the timing slip in an interview rather than a press release. The second season arrives in October of 2026 on Paramount Plus with Showtime, and while the streaming service has still not committed to an exact date in public, the showrunner has said the month out loud more than once. Filming began on the 13th of April in 2026, which lines up cleanly with a mid to late October debut, and everything released since has described the season as coming later in the year. October is not an accident, and the people making the show have not pretended otherwise. The original Dexter pilot aired on the first day of October in 2006. Bringing the 4th series in the franchise back in that exact month means the new season lands on the 20th anniversary of the moment Michael C. Hall first narrated A Drive Through Miami at night, and Phillips is well aware of the symmetry. The theory that the season contains a deliberate anniversary episode is one of the safest predictions anyone has made about it. The production details support the idea that this is being treated as the franchise's flagship rather than another limited experiment. Season 2 became the first production to lease space at Sunset Pier 94 Studios, a brand new facility on the west side of Manhattan overlooking the Hudson, where Paramount Television Studios took roughly 70,000 square feet across 2 sound stages. That is not the footprint of a show hedging its bets. The season runs 10 episodes, matching the first, with Scott Reynolds writing and Marco Siega directing, which keeps the same creative core that made the first season work. The business context around all of this shapes more theories than most viewers realize. Dexter Original Sin, the prequel with a younger version of the character, was renewed in the spring of 2025 and then quietly did not move forward, with reporting at the time indicating that executives at Paramount, freshly merged with Skydance, wanted to concentrate on the version of Dexter that has Michael C. Hall in it. The first season of Resurrection gave them every reason to make that choice. It drew roughly 3.1 million viewers across platforms in its first 3 days, the strongest streaming premiere Showtime had ever recorded, and it held a critical score in the mid-90s. That consolidation is the single most useful piece of information for evaluating any theory about how the season ends, and it cuts down a great many of them. A network that has just cleared the field to protect one show is not a network that lets that show conclude. Every theory predicting that Dexter is arrested, exposed publicly, or killed at the end of this season is running against the commercial reality that this is now the only Dexter series in production, that reporting has pointed to further seasons beyond this one, and that the finale of a flagship is designed to guarantee another year rather than to close the book. What that means in practice is that the most dramatic theories should be read as directions rather than destinations. Wallace almost certainly gets closer. She almost certainly does not finish. The most common structural prediction, and the one that fits both the storytelling and the business, is that the season ends with her holding real proof and being unable to act on it, either because the evidence is compromised or because someone she trusts buries it. or because the person standing between her and an arrest is a young officer in her own building with the same last name as her suspect. Harrison is where the long-term theories get most interesting, because a lot of the audience has concluded that the show is quietly building a successor, putting him in a uniform, giving him a love interest inside the homicide unit, and describing him as pursuing his own sense of justice alongside his father, are all decisions that expand his capacity to carry story. Michael C. Hall is in his mid-50s, and the season is openly about aging. The theory that Jack Alcott is being positioned to eventually front this franchise is not a wild one, and if it is correct, the second season is the year that groundwork gets laid. The endgame theories themselves fall into 4 rough camps, and they have been circulating in some form since before Resurrection was announced. The first has Dexter captured and imprisoned, spending a final season being interviewed and studied, which would let the franchise end on the psychology rather than the violence. The second has him killed by someone from his own past, with Harrison and Quinn as the 2 names most often attached. The third, and the one gaining ground because of the midlife crisis framing, has him simply running out, dying of the body rather than the consequences, which would be the bleakest available ending and the most consistent with what the show has been saying lately. The fourth camp argues that no ending is coming at all, and that the fourth wall break was the show telling the audience exactly that. A character who says out loud that he is whatever the people watching want him to be is a character who has stopped pretending there is a final chapter. Under that reading, the franchise has arrived at its honest form, an ongoing story about a man who does this forever because the audience will keep paying to watch him do it, and the seasons will continue until the numbers stop. What is worth separating out before all of this settles into speculation is how much of the new season is actually confirmed rather than theorized. Brian Cox is playing Don Frampt, Dan Stevens is playing Owen Stark, Bokeem Woodbine is Captain Mixon, and Nona Parker Johnson is Fiona Mixon. Gabriel Luna is Ray Ballard, the sleepy-eyed stranger, taken directly from the file stack Dexter carried out of the vault. Uma Thurman is back as Charlie, Kristen Ritter is back as Mia, Desmond Harrington is back as Joey Quinn, and James Remar, Natare Guma Imbaho Mwine, Kadia Saraf, Dominic Fumusa, and Emilia Suarez all return. 10 episodes, shot in New York, arriving before the end of the year. A few smaller confirmations sit alongside that list, and they are worth keeping in mind because they tend to be the pieces that turn out to matter. Photographers caught Michael C. Hall filming a sequence in which Dexter injects a man with something and then drags him into an alley, with the wrestler Chris Jericho playing the target. Another set of images placed Hall alongside Shavo Odagian, the System of a Down bassist, credited as a character named R.H. Neither of those is a season-long villain, and both fit the pattern the showrunner described, a central antagonist carrying the year while smaller targets pass through individual episodes. The absence of a firm premiere date is the last open question, and it is a slightly strange one given how much else has been shared. Paramount has committed publicly only to later in 2026, while the showrunner has said October. Production began in the middle of April and continued through the summer in New York, a comfortable schedule for an October delivery on a 10-episode order. The most common expectation among fans watching the calendar is a debut in the second half of the month, with weekly episodes running into the winter, which would put the finale somewhere near the end of the year. Everything beyond those confirmations is wide open, and that is unusual for a franchise this old. The first season had a mystery the audience could solve, because the Ripper's identity was hidden in plain sight, and the Killers Club had a finite membership. This season has been built the other way around. The villains were announced early, the alliances were photographed on public streets, and the emotional stakes were printed in a press release. The remaining questions are all about intent, and intent is the one thing set photographers cannot capture. The anniversary theory deserves more than a passing mention, because the franchise has already shown how it handles its own history. The first season filled a billionaire's basement with objects from cases the audience watched being solved, and staffed Dexter's own head with people he had already buried. That was a show reaching backward with both hands. Landing a new season in the exact month of a 20th anniversary gives the writers every excuse to do it again, and the most common prediction is a single episode built around Miami, either through flashback or through a return trip that puts Dexter back in the city where all of this started. The time jump makes that easier than it would otherwise be. By moving the story close to the present day, the show has quietly closed the distance between its own beginning and now. The pilot aired in 2006 and was set in 2006. A story that has now caught up to the present means 20 years have passed inside it at roughly the same rate they have passed outside it, unusual for television and enormously useful for a show about a man confronting his own age. Everything Dexter did in Miami is now a long time ago, for him and for the people still chasing it. One more piece of this is worth pausing on, because it says something about how this particular show works that no other theory in this script quite captures. The New York Ripper was never supposed to be a major character. He was texture, a cold case for a detective to be haunted by, a hooked tool on a wall with a placard under it. Then the audience decided otherwise. Clyde Phillips has said plainly that the volume of speculation around the name Don Frampt caught the writers off guard, that the reaction pushed them to think about the character far more seriously than they had planned, and that this is why he is in the second season at all. That is a rare thing to be able to point at. The theories did not simply predict the story. In this one specific case, they created it. A group of people arguing on the internet about 4 words printed in a file folder turned a background detail into a season-long antagonist played by one of the most decorated actors alive. Whatever else the new season turns out to be, part of it exists because the audience would not let a small mystery go, which is the same reason Dexter Morgan is still on television at all after being shot to death in the snow. One prediction is left, and it cuts across every other theory in this script. It is the one most experienced viewers keep returning to. Dexter Morgan has never knowingly killed an innocent person. He has come close. He has killed people whose guilt was thin, people who were dangerous rather than proven, and at least one man whose only crime was getting too close to him. But the code has always held on that single point, and the show has always understood that the moment it breaks, the character becomes something the audience cannot follow. This is the first season assembled with every ingredient required to break it. His target list came from a man who idolized murderers rather than from police records. His new partner may be lying to him about who she is and what she wants. His information is secondhand, his body is slower, his time is being controlled by a killer with a telephone, and his son is inside a police department that will eventually put a case in front of him. Every one of those pressures pushes in the same direction, toward a kill made in a hurry on somebody else's word. The theory holds that the season ends with Dexter standing over a body he should not have taken, and that the midlife crisis the network named in a press release is really a description of what happens to a man when the one rule holding him together stops working. It would explain the fourth wall break, since a character who has just told the audience he will be whatever they want is a character being set up to disappoint them. It would explain the Ripper, since Frampt exists to show what a killer looks like when the work is over, and only the appetite remains. Nothing confirms it. That is worth saying plainly, because this is a theory rather than a leak, and this franchise has surprised people who were certain before. But the first season closed with a man on a boat deciding he had finally understood himself, and every previous time Dexter Morgan reached that conclusion, the show spent the following year proving him wrong. That is what makes this particular stretch of waiting different from the usual gap between seasons. There is no shortage of information. There is an enormous amount of it, and none of it resolves. A dead woman having lunch in Brooklyn, a former enemy holding hands across a table, a killer in a wheelchair who cannot walk and cannot stop calling, a son with a badge, a detective with a hat she gave back to a dead man, and a man in his mid-50s with a list of 5 names in his pocket, telling anyone who will listen that he has finally worked out who he is. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.